All this talk and anticipation, today we're going to be starting our reading of Beowulf. And to do that, I have created a PDF of the textbook files as well as a guide that you see on your screen here with yellow highlights that will guide us to the first section. Just so you know, and I'll illustrate this in class, the Beowulf text is a very large epic poem, and we are just reading some selections from it. The translator is Burton Raffel. You read a passage from him last week just about his reflections on Beowulf. He was also the translator for The Seafarer, which we studied already as part of the Anglo-Saxon unit. I've created a split screen here because I think it'll be helpful as I walk you through kind of this opening passage today. I'm going to move right now and take a look at what is going to be page 39 of your textbook. And if you scroll in the attached PDF, you'll see it there. I like this section because it includes a summary of kind of what you're going to be reading. Obviously, you have enough background knowledge, I think, to kind of guide what's going to happen and what you're going to see in the text for the first time. But I'm going to go ahead and highlight this for you in this overview. And then what will happen is I will do a read aloud of it and fill out the guide with you. You have to watch the video in order to do it, though. So that's how I know you're getting the content, even if you're on a remote day today. Okay. Let's go ahead with our reading of page 39. It says, during Britain's Anglo-Saxon period from the 5th to the 11th century, few people were able to read, and movies lay centuries in the future. Although the actions takes place in the 6th century Scandinavia, Beowulf was originally told in Old English, the language spoken by the Anglo-Saxons of England during the years 500 to 1100. Beowulf, a Geat from the region that is today southern Sweden, sets sail to aid the Danish Hrothgar in his fight against the monsters Grendel, a terrifying swampland creature whose eyes burn with gruesome light. Grendel has been terrorizing Hrothgar's great banquet hall Heorot for 12 years. The battle between Beowulf, a young warrior of great strength and courage, and Grendel, his bloodthirsty foe, is the first of 3 mortal battles that are fought in the long poem. The tales of Beowulf originate from a time when stories and poems were passed along by word of mouth. In Anglo-Saxon England, traveling minstrels called Scops, also known as bards, captivated audiences with long narrative poems. These poems changed and grew as they were passed from one Scop to another. Beowulf was told and retold in this fashion throughout England for hundreds of years. In the 11th century, the epic was finally written down. Beowulf grew out of other earlier traditions. The monsters and dragons of the tale, the brave warriors steadfastly loyal to their heroic chief, the descent into the eerie regions below the earth, these were familiar elements of Scandinavian or Celtic folk tales. Even a detail as specific as Beowulf's seizure of Grendel's arm can be traced to earlier tales. Let me put my light up, it's dark. By forging these various traditions into one unified tale and by adding the later influence of Christianity, the Anglo-Saxons, Scops, created a central reference point for their culture. Listening to Beowulf, an Anglo-Saxon could learn of bravery and loyalty to one's fellows, of the monsters that spite and hatred could breed, and of the heroism needed to conquer these monsters. Okay, there's a couple of notes just about pop culture, including Seamus Heaney's modern-day translation, which I'll show you an example of. I have a copy of that in the room, as well as the film that was created using computer animation featuring Anthony Hopkins, Angelina Jolie, and John Malkovich, and a comic book, which I also have a copy of. I'll show you in class. All right, today's task is going to read the first section, which is called The Wrath of Grendel. It occurs on pages 40, 41, I'm sorry, yes, 40, 42, 41 is just an illustration in the textbook, 43 in the top of page 44. What you're going to see on the right-hand side here is how you're going to be evaluated. If you can recall from my class discussion, there's taking a look at the Beowulf text, we're going to do in multi-layers. So the first layer is going to be key plot points, basically who did what and maybe why. With a couple other basics. I think of the 5 basics in reporting for journalism, which I also teach: who, what, where, when, why, and then maybe how. But if you can't have a conversation about what's basically happening here, you can't go on to, it's not valuable for you to go on to looking at some of the poetic devices, which you can see we would do on a second reading or a third reading. How do we connect this to larger ideas of the culture? So today's going to be a couple fill in the blanks that I will do with you to teach you how to do this, because we're just getting started. Okay. I'm going to be looking at the left-hand side. In fact, I would recommend you open the PDF I've attached as another tab so that you could hear me in the background. And this way you can follow along and then go back and see what I did. Okay, So beginning on page 40, the background. When Beowulf was composed, England was changing from a pagan to a Christian culture. Pagan Anglo-Saxons told grim tales of life ruled by fate, tales in which people struggled against monsters for their place in the world. The missionaries who converted them to Christianity taught them that human beings and their choices of good or evil were at the center of creation. Beowulf reflects both pagan and Christian traditions. The selection opens during an evening of celebration at Heorot, the banquet hall of the Danish king Hrothgar. Outside in the darkness, however, lurks the murderous monster Grendel. So the first chunk of lines we're going to take a look at are lines 1 through 29, and then we're going to stop and discuss. So let's begin. So let me zoom in. Oh, it does. Good stuff. Okay. Can I do anything with it, though? Yes. Okay. The Wrath of Grendel. A powerful monster, living down in the darkness, growled in pain, impatient as day after day the music rang loud in that hall, the harp's rejoicing call and the poet's clear song sung of the ancient beginnings of us all, recalling the Almighty making the earth, shaping these beautiful plains marked off by oceans, then proudly setting the sun and moon to glow across the land and light it. The corners of the earth were made lovely with trees and leaves, made quick with life, with each of the nations who now move on its face. And then, as now, warriors sang of their pleasure. So Hrothgar's men lived happy in this hall till the monster stirred, that demon, that fiend Grendel, who haunted the moors, the wild marshes, and made his home in a hell, not hell, but earth. He was spawned in that slime, conceived by a pair of those monsters born of Cain, murderous creatures banished by God, forever punished for the crime of Abel's death. The Almighty drove those demons out, and their exile was bitter, shut away from men. They split into 1,000 forms of evil, spirits and fiends, goblins, monsters, giants, a brood forever opposing the Lord's will, and again defeated. All right, let's go ahead into our worksheet here. So we have a name for our monster, which you've already been introduced to. It's Grendel. He growls in pain because he despises the music and the noise he hears coming from Heorot, which is the name of the mead hall of King Hrothgar. So you would have entered those details in. Those are just main ideas. We'll go back tomorrow and look back at some more in-depth stuff, but for today, we just want to get the main idea. Okay, starting in line 30. Can I zoom in? I can't. Okay. I think. No, maybe not. All right, starting in line 30. Then when darkness had dropped, Grendel went up to Heorot, wondering what the warriors would do in the hall when their drinking was done. He found them sprawled in sleep, suspecting nothing, their dreams undisturbed. The monster's thoughts were as quick as his greed or his claws. He slipped through the door, and there in the silence snatched up 30 men, smashed them unknowing in their beds, and ran out with their bodies, the blood dripping behind him, back to his lair, delighted with his night's slaughter. All right, that's our next section. Who is it that sneaks up on the men in the mead hall? That's Grendel again. And he violently does what? He kills them. Okay, moving on, picking up. We're going to look now at lines 41 through 58. At daybreak, with the sun's first light, they saw how well he had worked, and in that gray morning broke their long feast with tears and laments for the dead. Hrothgar, their lord, sat joyless in Heorot, a mighty prince mourning the fate of his lost friends and companions, knowing by its tracks that some demon had torn his followers apart. He wept, fearing the beginning might not be the end. And that night Grendel came again, so set on murder that no crime could be enough, no savage assault quench his lust for evil. Then each warrior tried to escape him, searched for rest in different beds, as far from Heorot as they could find, seeing how Grendel hunted when they slept. Distance was safety, and the only survivors were those who fled him. Hate had triumphed. Okay, so if we go back to our guide here. So in the morning, Hrothgar and his men, they mourned the loss of their companions, right? Most of the warriors left, because remember, distance was safety, and the great mead hall stands relatively empty, with the exception of just a few. Okay, moving on to lines 59 through 78. So Grendel ruled, fought with the righteous, won against many and won. So Heorot stood empty and stayed deserted for years. 12 winters of grief for Hrothgar, king of the Danes, sorrow heaped at his door by hell-forged hands. His misery leaped the seas, was told and sung in all men's ears, how Grendel's hatred began, how the monster relished his savage war on the Danes, keeping the bloody feud alive, seeking no peace, offering no truce, accepting no settlement, no price in gold or land, and paying the living for one crime with another. No one waited for reparation from his plundering claws. That shadow of death hunted in the darkness, stalked Hrothgar's warriors, old and young, lying in waiting, hidden in mist, invisibly following them from the edge of the marsh, always there, unseen. So if you take a look at what kind of basic paraphrase we could get from lines 59 through 78, we know that Grendel terrorized Herod for 12 winters, which is more or less 12 years, right? And I'll talk to you tomorrow about why measuring years in terms of winters was meaningful. Okay? And says, and people all around heard songs, not singing like praising, but remember that's how they told stories of Hrothgar's tale. Okay, let's take a look at the last section, line 79 through 104. It says, so mankind's enemy continued his crimes, killing as often as he could, coming alone, bloodthirsty and horrible. Though he lived in Heorot when the night hid him, he never dared to touch King Hrothgar's glorious throne, protected by God. God, whose love Grendel could not know. But Hrothgar's heart was bent. The best and most noble of his council debated remedies, sat in secret sessions talking of terror and wondering what the bravest of warriors could do. And sometimes they sacrificed to the old stone gods, made heathen vows, hoping for hell's support, the devil's guidance in driving their affliction off. That was their way, and the heathen's only hope. Hell always in their hearts, neither knowing neither God nor his passing as he walks through our world, the Lord of heaven and earth. Their ears could not hear his praise nor know his glory. Let them beware, those who are thrust into danger, clutched at by trouble, yet can carry no solace in their hearts, cannot hope to be better. Hail to those who will rise to God and drop off their dead bodies and seek our Father's peace. So, what we learn is Grendel comes to live in Heorot, but never touches King Hrothgar's throne, and we'll talk about the significance of that tomorrow. It's protected by God, and there's a scripture that suggests that God protects leaders, or at least puts them in place. Hrothgar consults a bunch of advisors about how to solve this problem, and they even make sacrifices to their old stone gods or their pagan gods. Certainly a reference to the pagan structure here, and then certainly that little bit we just read explaining how, the person recording this is saying that's not how you're supposed to do it. Okay, so this brings us to the close of the Wrath of Grendel. What you're going to see tomorrow at the start of class is a reading check of some sort. Okay, it'll be our opening activity, whether you are home or in school. It'll be in the form of a Google quiz, which will limit the number of tabs you can get to, so that's important to realize. Again, if you have read and followed along, you'll be fine. This particular assignment is due today, and then what will happen tomorrow is we'll look for some of the nuances of the text. We will make reference to the biblical allusions in the opening song, which you were familiar with from watching those little videos I gave for you on Friday after your quiz about the creation of the world according to the Old Testament. That's referred to here, as well as this reference to Cain, that Grendel is an ancestor. He is a descendant of. We also see some examples of alliteration. I'll talk to you about the point of the caesura, even though you don't literally see a space here. And we'll talk about some of those pagan Christian references. So we'll talk about maybe the second and third level aspects of this section before moving on to the next section, which is the coming of Beowulf. Okay, that's all for now.